It's my journey.
No, it's my journey.
It's our journey.
Each person is on a unique journey in life, either growing closer to God or farther away. The television series My Journey showcases the real-life transformations that have brought individuals closer to God. Join us now for another episode of My Journey and witness the power of faith and perseverance.
Hello, and welcome to My Journey. Today we have a special guest with us, Pastor Gary Cristofaro.
Hi, Kathy.
And I say special because Gary and I have been friends for quite some time. Right, Gary?
It's been a while. Over 25 years or more or so? I think.
Yeah, good friends for 25 years.
Yeah.
You and I and our families, we've been doing a lot of work on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people together.
Yeah. And we're having a lot of fun at it.
We're having
right?
a lot of fun
Yeah.
at it. But I'm trying to find out what your story is. What's been your journey from there to where you are today? And would you have ever expected, Gary, that this is where you would be today, working in the Aliyah, doing the prophetic work that all of the ancient prophets talked about?
Wow. When I hear that coming back at me, it's like, wow. No, not in a million years would I have thought that I would be doing this when, as a child or even as a teenager. I never imagined the direction that God would have for my life.
But every journey has a beginning.
Mm-hmm.
What was your beginning?
Wow. I was raised in a Catholic family. And I went 8 years Catholic school. So I had an understanding of there was a God and he had a son, Jesus. But that was about it. I mean, there's a big difference, Kathy, as you know, in knowing about a God or knowing that there is a God and knowing him and being used by him and having an intimate relationship with him.
And I remember you have an interesting story about a book that you saw when you were young.
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that because it maybe seem out of place at the moment, and I'll come back to it. But here I was, a young boy, had given an assignment by a teacher to do a book report, like everybody in the class was, right? So we're told to go to the library, pick a book, and do a book report about it. So I walk into the library and I had no idea what I was going to read. I had no idea what I was looking for. And I see this book on the shelf with these two words. It said Babiar. Like, what is Babiar? I don't even know. And I don't even know why I was attracted to it, because Babiar was like a foreign language. What is Babiar? I pulled that book off the shelf and I read the most amazing story about a woman who survived a death camp. And I'll leave it at that for now because I'll come back to that story later in my journey experience here. But I read this book, did a book report. It was about this woman who survives, and you would think, I can't honestly say that book changed my life, but I never forgot it. And I never at that moment, it didn't change my life, but I never forgot the story. And later it comes back into play.
It's interesting. Lots of times God uses those moments and we're not aware of them as they're happening, but you realize it later.
You realize it later. He came back in a big way and realized that he was preparing me for something when I read that story.
So you go on, in your walk a little bit. And so tell me a little bit about, as you come into this understanding of who Israel is and what's your relationship, how did that happen for you?
Well, it started obviously from my Catholic days to what we most people in the Christian world call a born again experience.
Right.
Today. I was in after I spoke with my brother-in-law, and there's two brother-in-laws within my story. My sister and my brother-in-law in Jacksonville, which I love dearly, started speaking to me about what it meant to have a relationship with God, and he led me through a salvation prayer. Okay, so
one brother-in-law,
my first brother-in-law led me through my salvation prayer. They took me, my sister and he took me to a Bible bookstore, bought my first Bible. And I bought a little pin that said, "I'm a King's kid." And that's where my journey began, because I came home from Jacksonville, went back to work, and I was a different person. I mean, people were like,
how old were you?
I was 22 years old.
Okay.
And
Youngster.
yeah, but I had been quite a partier, and had a lot of friends there at work who were like, what's going on? What's different about you? And I had an opportunity to share what had happened in my life. Some thought it was great. Some thought I was crazy. But I went off and I started street witnessing, writing tracts. I was on fire for the Lord. But as that journey continued, something seemed to be missing. All of a sudden, again, I was in that place that started my quest for God. I at one point said, "Is this all there is?" And that question was answered with accepting Jesus as my Messiah and Lord. But then, as 10 years passed, as being this born again Christian, I still felt something was missing, and I didn't know what that was.
Yeah, I think a lot of us had that.
Yeah. And so a couple named Jamie and Neil Lash came to the church and did a Seder. They did a Passover Seder at the church I was attending. And all of a sudden, you know what Paul says about one person plants, another waters. They planted a seed. I thought, wow, there's something to this. There's something that I'm missing. And that's where brother-in-law number 2 came into play.
Wow.
Yeah.
Importance of family.
Importance of family. Thank God I have some great brother-in-laws. And brother-in-law number 2, who was going to a church that supported Israel, came to me and said, I think you need to read Romans chapter 11 again. I thought, okay. I had read Romans 11 before, but I sat down with him, read Romans 11, and a light came on. Kathy, it was like, oh my gosh, we're part of something that huge here. It really meant the world to me, because up until now, it had been a personal experience. God did something in my life, and it's great, and I love it. But now I'm looking at this and saying, I became part of something much, much bigger than myself in this journey.
Wow. Now that's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I would encourage those of you who are listening, go back and read Romans 11. I understand the experience that Gary had here. It can be extremely life-changing.
It was.
One chapter.
One chapter. It's all it took.
Eyes open. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So from there, I was like, all right, how do I get involved? If I'm part of Israel in some way, how does that manifest in a practical way? And so I got an invitation to go to Washington, D.C. The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem was having a lobbying event. They were going to have, conferences and then lobby George Bush Sr. at the time.
Okay.
Because here was what was going on. It was 1992. This is a year after the Soviet Union had collapsed, and Jewish people were going to Israel for the first time. And events over the course of time, 1.5 million Soviet Jews have gone to Israel. But at the time, the gates had just opened. They're going to Israel, and Israel's trying to make homes for them. They're trying to absorb all these people.
All those people, yeah.
So they had to build homes, and they wanted loan guarantees from Washington. All they wanted was loan guarantees so they could build homes, right? George Bush Sr. was holding those loan guarantees hostage because he didn't want them building in Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank. I should have said West Bank, Judea and Samaria, right? So he's holding these loan guarantees hostage. So we go to Washington to lobby and say, you need to bless Israel. You need to make sure that they can do what they need to do.
Wow.
I'm on the bus going into Capitol Hill, and I hear these words in my thoughts. You're going to be helping Jewish people get home to Israel. I'm like, what does that mean? What is that? I had no idea what that meant at the time. And I'm here helping Jews get home to Israel. And then when I piece this together with the reason why we're in Washington in the first place, okay, so that I registered that, but had no idea how that was going to happen.
Isn't that interesting how God, he's prophecy is being fulfilled, but in such a practical way,
Right.
right?
A prophecy is fulfilled in practical ways. We don't have to over spiritualize it.
And I think that's important to remember for all of us, that it doesn't have to look big and like a big miracle, happening. The seas are partying or something like that.
Right.
It doesn't have to. It looks like lobbying in DC.
Yeah, or homes being built, or giving a helping hand to a Jewish person
So
in order.
practical.
All practical.
Wow.
It doesn't look like a miracle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. I love that. So when did you get to Israel?
So a year later.
Okay.
It took from 1 year from the time I had this understanding and this experience to get to Israel. I went on tour in 1993, and I was a sponge. I mean, I wanted to learn all I could about this land, and I fell in love with the nation of Israel and the people there. And I remember this moment I had. I'd been there for 2 weeks at least. It was a good long tour, and our guide at the time was named Yehuda Guy. This man became a lifelong friend, but I had just met him, and we had spent a couple weeks together. And I said to Yehuda on the last day of the tour, Yehuda, you have a beautiful country here. And he said something to me that set me back, because you wouldn't expect a member of the Ministry of Tourism to say what he said. I said, Yehuda, you have a beautiful country. He said, you're looking through rose-colored glasses, Gary. And I thought, what? What is he talking about? Why would he say that? And we finished our conversation, but that thought of that comment pierced me in my heart. I'm like, what was he trying to tell me? So I go home and I'm telling the whole world, anybody that would listen, about my experience in Israel. I mean, I'm like a reform, you know that experience, right? Like the reform smoker, hitting everybody up, showing them my pictures, And so I set myself to learn. I wanted to learn more about what I experienced, the land, the history, the people. And I would go back time and time again. I started volunteering. I went on a volunteer trip to Israel, and learned all I could. And I'm going to come back to that volunteer trip, and I'm going to share something else about that. But I learned all that I could. And I was going to Israel on volunteer trips and tours, and then later leading tours when I became a pastor. 10 years almost to the day, because it was same month, 10 years later, I'm on tour with Yehuda again, this time leading it with him. And I said, Yehuda, you remember the conversation we had about you having a beautiful country? And he looked at me and he remembered. He says, yeah, I told you were looking through rose-colored glasses. I said, yeah, that one. I said, I have been coming back now for 10 years. I have studied, I've done my due diligence, and I've learned a lot, and I keep coming back. And I want to tell you something. You have a beautiful country here. And he says, you're right. He set me up he wanted me to learn. He wanted me to know the history.
Smart man.
He was brilliant, really. And I came back and said, you have a beautiful country. He says, you're right. Because now he knew I wasn't speaking from just this wonderful tour experience where everything is done for you,
I love that.
Yeah.
So let's finish your story in just one moment.
Do you stand with Israel? Now is the time to show how much you care. Now is the time to take a stand. I'm Gary Cristofaro, Vice President of Ezra International. This is a battle between good and evil. Ezra International and our sister organization, Ministry to Israel, are on the ground in Israel supporting the IDF and helping the Jewish people in their great hour of need. We are supplying tens of thousands of items: food, clothing, mattresses, Kevlar vests for the soldiers, and so much more. We are helping the evacuees and helping keep our recent immigrants safe. With the recent rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment around the globe, Israel is still the safest place for the Jewish people. It is their home. Will you help? Please go to EzraInternational.org and give to the Emergency Relief Fund today.
Welcome back. We're talking today with Gary Cristofaro, the Vice President of Ezra International. And Gary, you were just in the middle of a great story about your trip to Israel, and you have other ones too.
Yeah.
Trips, other stories.
Well, I wanted to finish up with that volunteer trip, my first volunteer trip. Remember now, I had this in my mind that somehow God is calling me to help Jewish people get home to Israel. I go to volunteer with the Christian embassy, and I see this bus outside the Benyanei Ha'uma Auditorium, which is in Jerusalem, where the events are being held, and it says Exabus on it. Now, this was one of the early ministries that was helping Jewish people get home to Israel from the former Soviet Union. So I thought, well, is that what God is calling me to do? Am I going to be traveling through Europe or the former Soviet Union and doing this? And I also met an individual along on my journeys named Barry Wagner, who was the vice president of Ezra International prior to my journey in that position. I knew Barry, and I knew he was there, and I went to speak to him. And he was representing Ezra International at the embassy event. And as I was speaking to him, I met the founder of Ezra International, Mel Hosel. Now, I met he and his wife, Joanne, and I talked with Barry, and we chatted for a little while, but I had to get back to work. I didn't know it at the time, but Mel turned to Barry and said, that man's going to be working in the Aliyah.
Wow. So just so we make sure everyone understands, when Gary is talking about the Aliyah, he's talking about the Jewish people coming back home from the nations and coming to back home to Israel. And that's what you're doing.
That's
right?
what I'm doing. I'm glad. Thank you for clarifying. He knew somehow. The Spirit of God told him.
Mel was good at that.
He was. He was a man who heard from God. But I didn't know he told Barry that. And I had just met Mel. He knew nothing of my experience.
Only what God told him.
Only what God told him.
Wow.
So later, as you got to do something with this. When you're pent up, you got to do something with what God is telling you. So I decided to get credentialed and become a pastor, become a minister, because I felt I needed that credibility. People don't want to listen to you unless they think that you know what you're talking about. So I studied and I became credentialed, and I wanted to be able to influence people. And so I became a minister.
Wow.
As I pastored the church that I pastored for 14 years, I invited Barry Wagner to come speak at our church and talk about Ezra International. And my wife and I started giving to Ezra International, knowing this was a great ministry. I thought, at least I'm helping Jewish people get home. That's fulfilling my calling. I thought that was as far as I could go with it, right? Well, Barry invites me to go to Ukraine in 2003. And I thought, okay, let's do it. The board agreed that this was a great idea. I go to Ukraine for my first time. Here we come full circle. I'm in Kiev, Ukraine, and Barry takes us to Babi Yar.
Wow.
I mean,
How many years ago was that when you read that?
I was a child. I don't even know if I was a teenager yet.
Did that click?
It did. All of a sudden, I'm like, Babi Yar. Well, I'm here. This is what I read about. This is where this woman, who was one of the very few survivors, she was standing along these pits that I'm standing over now. And as the machine gun came toward her, the bullets were coming toward her, she fell into this pit, along with all the dead bodies that people had been killed before she was there, and all the people that were falling on top of her afterwards. And she was not hit. She fell in without getting hit. And she later crawled out. And there's an amazing story. I recommend, if you can get a hold of a book that has, I don't think the book that I read is even in print anymore. But I read the story again years later, found it in a book called Babi Yar, and I found her story within it.
Well, there were very few survivors.
Very few. And so here I was standing over this pit, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I realized why I had read that book. how it had impacted me then, but now how much more it's impacting me. And I found out later, Kathy, that there's a quote there that I had read at Yad Vashem from a righteous Gentile named Imre Vithori. And it's somewhere on the property at Babi Yar, and I didn't even know it. But when I read it, I immediately adopted it as my own. And it says, when I go before God on Judgment Day, I will not be asked the question posed to Cain, where were you when your brother's blood was crying out to God? Because what I experienced at those killing pits was I could almost sense or hear the blood of all those Jewish people crying out to God. There was over 30,000 individuals, Jewish individuals, killed in that pit in 2 days, and then thousands more. And then, of course, there were Egyptian gypsies and others killed there. But Jews, by far, were the biggest group of people killed.
So you were getting this understanding, obviously deep within yourself. And were you able to convey that within your church? Were you able to share that to some degree? Did other people get it?
Yes. I was able to come back and share my experiences and speak of the importance of the Aliyah, the Jewish people returning, and others became donors. As I said, my wife and I were already donating, and I shared. Of course, over the years, I shared it with you, and I've shared it with so many others that would listen. But again, I felt that there was more I needed to do. And so I started volunteering with Ezra International as a representative. I became a representative. Barry Wagner's brother, who was speaking on behalf of Ezra International, had a heart attack. And Barry came to me and says, can you cover his services while he's recovering? And so I started covering some of Richard's services. I went to churches. My first trip, Darlene and I went, my wife, Darlene, and I went to Birmingham, Alabama. And then the same day drove to the Panhandle for an evening service in Florida. And we did services, and we started speaking on behalf of Ezra International.
And you were doing that as a volunteer while you were still pastoring?
I was doing it as a volunteer as I still pastored, kept doing that because I knew this was something that I had to do, Kathy.
Yes.
And
what was the time frame in this?
This was in the between 2000 and 2010.
So that's when we were meeting up and getting involved, because it really was from you that I learned about Aliyah.
Yeah, and you helped us. You did a fundraiser for us.
Yes.
That was around 2014 because the war broke out in Ukraine, and by that time I had gone to Mel and I said, Mel, because I got to know Mel through my volunteer work with him. I said, I really would love to be full-time with Ezra if ever the opportunity would come. And he looked at me and he says, it's about time. And then he told me what he told Barry. It said to Barry back when my volunteer days. That's when I finally heard that. He finally told me that he had said that to Barry. So I'm like, okay, he's been waiting for me all along.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic.
So in 2014, I ended up going full time with Ezra International,
and that's when I joined up with you.
And that's when we did that. We did the fundraiser.
Yeah, we did kind of a fun thing. My daughter's in theater, had all these theater friends, and they were seniors in high school, and so we did what did we call it, Gary?
I started the song.
It's a song. Broadway's Jewish Legacy. And so we did a singing and dancing and performing, and we raised money to help those people who were trying to get out during the war.
Yes, raise money. Yes, money and awareness.
Well, obviously awareness.
Because at the time, 2014, nobody had ever heard of Ukraine.
Exactly.
And here now it's been in the news for because the war escalated.
Exactly. Wow. I find it fascinating that that God knows us. He knows us from the very beginning, just like Jeremiah said, I knew you from your womb. And he picks us for that, and he walks us through and puts us into those places.
Yeah.
And we don't know it at the time, do we? We don't realize it at the time, how he's preparing us in those ways. Just putting your brother-in-law where both brother-in-laws, because you have to have some kind of conversion experience first, right? You've got to start somewhere.
You've got to start the journey
somewhere, right? And then we keep taking that walk and keep doing that, step by step by step.
Right.
And sometimes we don't know where it's going. Obviously, Mel knew because
and you don't need to know. And that's the beauty of this thing. And I'm glad you brought it up especially for our audience sake, is that if you have this call of God and you right away think, oh, how do I make it work? How do I get? Don't
even try.
Don't even try.
Exactly.
No.
He's going to lay it out. Right?
Amen. Seek him.
That's right.
Seek him, not the ministry, and he will lay it out for you. My life story is a perfect example of that.
It is a perfect example. And I'm so glad that you were able to share that with us. And that's the whole reason that we're doing this particular show is we want to hear from people like Gary. What were the steps of their journey? Because everybody has different steps and a different journey. And he's bringing us, many of us, to a similar place, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, in this work, I'm calling you to work and do the aliyah work, the call to fulfillment of prophecy.
Right.
But any support of Israel any relationship to Israel is fulfillment of prophecy.
Amen. Amen.
And each of us has our different part that we're going to play. And that's really the point of what we want to do. As we learn these stories, I want to thank you, Gary, for coming and sharing your story, because it's very inspirational. And we have others that will be coming and sharing their walk from where God started them and to where they are 10 years later, 20 years later. Each one of these stories is different and unique. And I hope that in hearing Gary's story, I hope as you hear that it will inspire you in the journey that God is taking you. So join us, please, in our next episode as we listen and hear the story of another person who's been obedient to the call, not knowing where the end of that journey is, but that's okay.
It's
right?
okay.
It's okay. It's just the steps in the journey. So I hope that Gary's journey serves as an inspiration for your journey. Shalom, everyone.
Shalom, Kathy.
Bye.